A follower who works as a night watchman in a municipal cemetery sent me this experience a few days ago. His name is Roberto, and what he experienced during his rounds made him question everything he believed about death. If you work at night in lonely places and have seen things you can't explain, I would love for you to share below. Now let me tell you what Roberto discovered on the darkest nights among the graves. My name is Roberto and I work as a night watchman at the San Miguel Municipal Cemetery on the outskirts of Montevideo, Uruguay. I have been in this job for 12 years, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had seen it all. Drunks sneaking into sleep among the graves, teenagers playing pranks, occasional acts of vandalism. Nothing I couldn't handle with a call to the police. But what began to happen last March completely changed my perspective on what I really watch over each night. San Miguel Cemetery is one of the oldest in the city. It was founded in 1835, and some of its graves are historical monuments. It covers approximately 10 hectares, with marble mausoleums, family crypts, and more modest sections where ordinary people rest. During the day, it is a quiet place where families visit their deceased. But at night, when the gates close and only I remain with my flashlight, the cemetery transforms into something completely different. I work the shift from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, 6 days a week. My routine is simple. I make rounds every hour, check that the gates are closed, that there are no intruders, that branches haven't fallen on the graves. Between rounds, I sit in the watchtower at the main entrance, where I have a small television, a coffee maker, and a heater for the cold winters. I have seen strange things over the years. Lights that seem to move among the graves but disappear when I get closer. Sounds that I can't fully explain. Whispers when there is no wind. Footsteps on gravel when I am alone. But I always found ways to rationalize it. The lights were reflections of cars on the nearby street. The sounds were nocturnal animals or the settling of old structures. Until the night of March 15th. It was a Friday, and it had been raining all afternoon. The air was cool and damp, with that low mist that makes everything look blurry and distant. I started my shift as usual, checking the perimeter, making sure all the side doors were locked. Around midnight, during my third round, I noticed something unusual. In the oldest section of the cemetery, where the 19th century graves are, there was a light. It wasn't the kind of light I had seen before, a fleeting reflection I could attribute to car headlights. This was constant, soft, like the light of a candle, emanating from one of the largest mausoleums. I approached, with my flashlight held high. The mausoleum belonged to the Ortega family, one of the founding families of Montevideo. It was an imposing structure of white marble with columns and a wrought iron door, and that door, which had always been locked with a rusty padlock, was ajar. "Is anyone there?" I shouted, expecting to find vandals or vagrants. There was no response. The light continued to flicker softly from within. I pushed the door, which opened with a prolonged creak. Inside, the mausoleum was larger than I expected. It could hold maybe 20 coffins, arranged in niches in the walls. And in the center of the space, on the marble floor, there were 3 lit black candles, forming a perfect triangle. In the center of the triangle, there were symbols drawn with something that looked like ash or charcoal. They were not random scribbles. They were deliberate, precise, and although I had no idea what they meant, they made me feel deeply uncomfortable. Someone had been here. Someone had performed some kind of ritual. I carefully extinguished the candles, swept the symbols with my boot, and closed the mausoleum, making sure the lock was firmly in place this time. I reported the incident in my night log. Possible vandal activity at the Ortega mausoleum. Strange symbols found. Area secured. I thought that would be the end of the matter, but I was wrong. 2 nights later, a Sunday, I found the same mausoleum open again. And once again, the 3 black candles, the triangle, the symbols on the ground. But this time there was something else. A small doll, made of dry branches tied with red string, placed in the exact center of the triangle. A chill ran down my spine. This was not the work of bored teenagers. It was something more deliberate, more serious. Someone was using the cemetery to practice some kind of witchcraft or dark ritual. I called the police. 2 officers arrived an hour later, inspected the mausoleum, took photographs, and confiscated the doll as evidence. They promised to increase patrols in the area, but we both knew that with the department's limited resources, that meant maybe 1 additional visit per week. "Do you have any idea who could be doing this?" one of the officers asked me. "I haven't seen anyone. I make rounds every hour, I don't know how they get in without me seeing them. The officers left, and I continued my shift, but I could no longer relax. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every sound put me on alert. Over the next 2 weeks, the mausoleum was violated 4 more times, and each time, the ritual seemed to become more elaborate. More candles, more complex symbols, strange objects left behind, small animal bones, jars with dark liquids, burned photographs of people I didn't recognize. I installed a security camera pointing directly at the Ortega mausoleum. If anyone approached, we would capture it on video. The first night with the camera, I reviewed the recording the next morning, and what I saw left me frozen. At 3:17 in the morning, the door of the mausoleum opened, but no one opened it. It simply opened by itself, slowly moving outward. Then, for about 15 minutes, the camera showed only the dark entrance of the mausoleum. No one visible entered or exited. But when I went to physically check the mausoleum that morning, there they were. The candles, the symbols, everything perfectly set up as in previous times. How was that possible? The camera had recorded continuously. No one had entered, and yet someone or something had performed the ritual. I showed the recording to my supervisor, hoping he might have an explanation. He watched it in silence, his expression growing more serious. "Roberto, I need to tell you something about that mausoleum," he finally said. "Something that few know." He took me to his office and pulled out an old file from a drawer. It contained cemetery documents dating back decades. In 1952, there was an incident at the Ortega mausoleum. A woman named Iris Vidal was found dead inside. She had performed some kind of suicidal ritual, poisoning herself while surrounded by candles and symbols. She left a note saying that she had made a pact with something she called the guardian of the thresholds, and that her death was just the beginning of that pact. What kind of pact? The note was delirious, full of nonsensical words, but the coherent part said that she would open a path between the world of the living and the dead, that every new moon she would return to complete her work. Obviously, the authorities dismissed it as the ramblings of a mentally ill woman. But what? Every so often over the years, night watchmen have reported strange activity in that mausoleum, always around the new moon, and always the same pattern. Candles, symbols, ritual objects. Some watchmen quit because of it, others simply stopped reporting it. Why did no one do anything? My supervisor shrugged. What could they do? There's no evidence that anyone is entering. There's no real damage. It's easier to ignore it than to try to explain it. But I couldn't ignore it. Not now that I knew the story, and definitely not after what happened that very night. It was a new moon. I knew something would happen, so I decided to stay awake all night, watching the mausoleum from a safe distance, hidden behind a large tree with a clear view of the entrance. The hours passed slowly. Midnight, 1 in the morning, 2. At 3 in the morning, just as the recording had shown, the door of the mausoleum began to open, slowly, without anyone touching it, as if an invisible hand was pushing it. I forced myself to remain hidden, watching. The mist had grown thicker, swirling around the mausoleum in a way that seemed almost alive. And then I saw her. A figure emerged from the mausoleum. It was a woman, dressed in vintage clothing from the 50s. A dark dress, low-heeled shoes, hair pulled back in a bun. She walked with deliberate steps, as if she were in a trance. She was carrying a bag from which she took out the black candles, the jars, all the implements of the ritual. She meticulously arranged them on the floor of the mausoleum, working with the skill of someone who has done this thousands of times. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. This woman seemed solid, real, but she had emerged from a sealed mausoleum, filled with coffins of people who had died decades ago. How was that possible? I took out my cell phone trying to record, but as soon as I pointed the camera at her, the screen filled with static. The phone completely shut down, as if the battery had instantly drained. The woman finished preparing her ritual. She knelt in the center of the triangle of candles and began to sing. I couldn't clearly hear the words from my hiding place, but the sound was unsettling, a monotonous melody in a language I didn't recognize. As I sang, something began to change in the air. The temperature dropped abruptly, my breath became visible, and the mist started to move in ways that normal fog shouldn't move. It swirled, condensed, taking on almost humanoid shapes. There were figures in the fog, dozens of them, spectral shapes materializing at the edges of the cemetery, slowly moving towards the mausoleum, drawn by the woman singing. They were the dead, the spirits of those buried here, and she was summoning them. Terror paralyzed me. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to get out of the cemetery and never return. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, watching this impossibility unfold before me. The spectral figures surrounded the mausoleum, forming a circle. The woman raised her arms, her singing reaching a crescendo. And then, in the exact center of her triangle of candles, something began to materialize. It was a crack in the air. There is no better way to describe it, as if space itself were tearing, revealing something behind. A darkness deeper than any normal blackness, a darkness that seemed to pulse and breathe. From that crack emerged things. They were neither human nor animal. They were twisted, impossible shapes that hurt to look at directly, tentacles of shadow, eyes that shone with sickly light, mouths full of teeth that should not exist. The woman spoke with these things in that strange language. She seemed to be negotiating, offering something in exchange for something else. The spirits of the dead watched silently, witnesses to this profane exchange. Then, without warning, the woman turned her head directly towards my hiding place. Our eyes met through the mist and darkness. She shouldn't have been able to see me. I was perfectly concealed, in the shadows, motionless. But she saw me. She smiled. And that smile was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen in my life. It was neither malicious nor cruel. It was empty, emotionless, like the smile of a doll or a mask. He raised a hand, pointing at me. The things that had emerged from the crack turned towards me. The spirits of the dead turned towards me. All at once, they began to move in my direction. That was the moment my paralysis broke. I ran. I ran faster than I had run in years, stumbling over roots and gravestones, not caring about the direction as long as it was away from that mausoleum and the things coming towards me. I could feel them behind me. I didn't hear footsteps but a collective whisper, like 1,000 voices speaking at the same time. The air around me turned icy. My lungs burned with every breath. I reached the guard booth, threw myself inside and locked the door. The booth's windows had metal bars, installed years ago for protection against vandals. I had never been so grateful for those bars. Things arrived moments later. I saw them pressing against the windows, dark and twisted shapes blocking the street light. The spirits of the dead floated around the booth, their spectral faces looking inward with expressions of pleading or warning. It was hard to tell. And among them, walking calmly toward the booth's door, was the woman. Iris Vidal, the one who had died in 1952, the one who had made a pact with something dark and had promised to return every new moon. He stopped in front of the door. Through the reinforced glass, he could see her clearly. Her skin was pale, almost transparent. Her eyes were black, completely black, with no visible white. And when she spoke, her voice penetrated through the door as if there were no barrier. "Watcher," she said. Her voice was multiple, as if many people were speaking simultaneously. "You have seen what you should not have seen. You have interrupted the sacred work." "I didn't want to. I'm just doing my job," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "Your job is to watch over the dead, but you do not understand what that really means. The dead do not rest peacefully in their graves. They are trapped, prisoners between worlds, suffering in silence. I offer them release. I open the door so they can finally cross." "Where do they cross to?" Her smile widened. "To where we all must eventually go. To the other side of the veil. To the realm of the guardian of the thresholds." "And those things? The monsters that came with you?" "They are not monsters. They are the guardians of the path. They ensure that only the truly dead can cross. The living must remain here unless they voluntarily choose to make the journey." "Are you offering me a choice?" "Everyone has a choice, Watcher. You can forget what you saw tonight. You can go on with your life, ignorant of the deeper truths. Or you can join me in my work. You can help free the trapped dead. You can serve the guardian." "And what if I refuse both options?" The smile vanished from her face. "Then you will become a problem that must be resolved." The things in the windows began to press harder. The glass creaked under the pressure. I knew it wouldn't hold much longer. "I have until dawn to decide," I said, trying to buy time. Iris Vidal tilted her head, considering. "Until dawn then, but choose wisely, Watcher. Your soul is at stake." She and the things withdrew, fading into the mist. The spirits of the dead lingered a moment longer, looking at me with what seemed to be pity, before also disappearing. I stayed in the guardhouse, trembling, waiting for dawn. It was the longest wait of my life. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound seemed to be them returning. When the sun finally rose, the first light of day swept over the cemetery. Everything seemed normal again, calm, peaceful, as if the nightmare of the previous night had never happened. But when I went to the Ortega mausoleum, I found evidence that it had indeed occurred. The candles were there, burned down to the stubs. The symbols were drawn, and in the center of the triangle, there was a message written in ash. Until the next new moon, choose. I quit that very morning. I told my supervisor that I had health issues, that I needed a less stressful job. He didn't ask questions. I think he knew. But resigning did not end my problems. Because every new moon since then, no matter where I am, I feel its presence. Sometimes I see it in the corners of my vision, watching me from the shadows, reminding me that I still haven't made my choice. I have researched everything I can about Iris Vidal. She was an ordinary woman before her death. She worked as a secretary, lived alone, and had no family. The police records of her death mention that she had been studying occult texts in the months leading up to her suicide, particularly about something called the Guardians of the Thresholds, entities supposedly responsible for guiding souls between life and death. I found her grave in the cemetery. It is in the oldest section, a simple headstone with just her name and dates. I left flowers there. I'm not sure why. Maybe I thought that if I showed respect, she would leave me in peace. It didn't work. The last new moon, 3 days ago, she appeared in my apartment. She didn't break the door or the window. She was just there when I woke up at 3 in the morning, sitting in the chair next to my bed. "The time is running out, Roberto," she said, using my name for the first time. "You have avoided the decision for 6 months, but you can't avoid it forever. On the next new moon, you either join me, or I take your soul anyway. Those are your only options now." Why me? Why not just continue your ritual and leave me alone? Because you saw. Because you know. I can't allow that knowledge to exist without consequence. Either you become part of the work, or you become part of the payment. She disappeared after that, leaving me alone in the darkness, my heart pounding wildly. I have considered going to the police, to the church, to anyone who can help. But what would I tell them? That I am being haunted by the ghost of a woman who died in 1952? That every new moon opens a door between worlds in a cemetery in Montevideo? They would lock me up in a psychiatric hospital. I have considered fleeing, moving to another city, another country, but I know it would be of no use. Iris Vidal has waited more than 70 years to fulfill her pact. She is not going to let something as simple as distance stop her. So here I am, sharing this story, waiting for the next new moon that arrives in 5 days. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if there is really a choice, or if my fate was sealed the night I decided to hide and observe instead of fleeing. Part of me, a small dark part, is curious. What is really on the other side of the veil? Is it worse than this life of constant fear? Do the dead really suffer in their graves as Iris claims, or is it just a justification for her dark pact? But most of me is terrified. I don't want to die. I don't want to serve incomprehensible entities. I just want all of this to end, to be able to return to a normal life where the only thing I had to worry about was catching vandals and securing doors. I have started carrying protection symbols with me. A crucifix that belonged to my grandmother, salt in my pockets, an amulet I bought from a seller of esoteric items who probably thinks I'm a lunatic. I don't know if they do any good, but they make me feel slightly less vulnerable. I have also been documenting everything. I have written down every detail of my encounters with Iris Vidal. I have drawn the symbols she uses in her rituals. I have recorded the exact dates of each new moon. If something happens to me, at least there will be a record. And now, sharing this here, there is a public testimony. Maybe that offers some protection. Or maybe it just serves as my final confession before the next new moon arrives and I have to face my choice. I don't know what I will do when that moment arrives. I don't know if I will have the courage to refuse and face the consequences, or if my survival instinct will lead me to accept their offer and become part of something dark and unnatural. The only thing I know for sure is that in 5 days, when the moon disappears from the sky again, I will discover my answer. And whatever my decision may be, my life as I knew it has already ended. There is no turning back from what I have seen, from what I know. The dead do not rest in peace. There are doors between worlds that some open, and watching over a cemetery means much more than just protecting graves from vandals. It means being on the edge of realities that most people will never know. I wish I had remained ignorant. I wish I had never investigated those candles in the Ortega mausoleum. I wish I had quit the first night something seemed strange to me. But I didn't. And now I live with the consequences of my curiosity. That is the story that Roberto sent me. He contacted me 3 days ago, just before the new moon he mentions. I haven't heard from him since then. I've tried calling him, writing to him, but he doesn't respond. I don't know if he made his choice, or if the choice was made for him. If anyone knows the San Miguel Municipal Cemetery in Montevideo, or if you have worked there, let me know in the comments. Maybe someone else knows what happened to Roberto. Take care, and rest easy tonight. A follower named Marcos sent me this story a few days ago, and since I read it, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Before I start, if you have any inexplicable experiences you'd like to share, leave them in the comments. I love reading them. Marcos lived in an old building in downtown Bogota, one of those buildings that have more history accumulated in the walls than one would care to imagine. He didn't believe in anything supernatural. He was an engineer, a man of logic, of concrete solutions. But what began as strange noises in his apartment ended up leading him to discover something about that building and about himself that forever changed the way he understands the world. This is his story. I arrived at the Restrepo building in March after getting my first stable job as a systems engineer at a firm in downtown Bogota. The building had 7 floors, a dark stone facade, and had been built in the 1940s. Apartment 4B was small but sufficient. Living room, kitchen, 1 bedroom, bathroom. The price was reasonable for the area. The manager, a lady in her 60s named Mrs. Carmen, handed me the keys with a kind smile and told me to report any plumbing issues before Friday. She didn't say anything else. The first few days were normal. I settled in, bought what I needed, learned the building's schedules. The neighbors were discreet, almost invisible. The one in 4A, a man in his 50s whom I saw twice in the elevator and who never returned my greeting. The couple in 3B, young, who played music on Saturdays until 11. The lady in 5A, older, who always smelled of rose water when I crossed paths with her in the hallway. Everything perfectly ordinary. It was in the second week when I started to hear the knocks. They were coming from inside the wall. Not from the wall that faced the neighbor's apartment, but from the back wall, which according to the building plans did not adjoin any other living space. 3 sharp knocks always at night, always between 1 and 3 in the morning. They weren't loud enough to be an alarm, but they were regular enough to be impossible to ignore. The first time I thought about pipes. Old buildings make strange noises. Pressurized water creates knocks in the pipes. There is thermal expansion in the materials. I explained everything to myself perfectly and went back to sleep. The second night, the knocks were accompanied by something else. A smell. It wasn't a strong or unpleasant smell. It was something subtle, almost pleasant in a way I didn't know how to articulate. Something like incense, but older, denser, as if it had been impregnated in the walls for decades. The third night I got up with a flashlight and checked the wall inch by inch. Old adobe, peeling paint in some areas, no significant cracks. Nothing that explained anything. I went to talk to Mrs. Carmen the next day. I found her in her office on the first floor, a small room with a desk full of papers and a picture of the Sacred Heart on the wall. I told her about the noises. She listened attentively, nodding with an expression I interpreted as professional concern over a maintenance issue. But when I mentioned the smell, something changed in her face. It was just a moment, a slight tightening around the eyes, a tension in the jaw. I saw it clearly, although she immediately concealed it. "The pipes on that floor are old," she said. "I will send someone to check." "And the smell." "Humidity," she said. "Old buildings smell like that." It wasn't humidity. I know what humidity smells like. But I didn't insist. That week I asked around the building, not directly about the noises, but in general, as if making conversation. I asked the lady from 5A, whom I frequently crossed paths with, if the building had a lot of history. She looked at me with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased by the question. "A lot," she said. "This building was a clinic before, in the 50s. A private clinic like the old ones." "How long was it a clinic?" Almost 20 years, until they closed it down. Why did they close it? The lady from 5A adjusted her purse on her arm with a gesture that seemed deliberate. Things that happen in business, she said, and changed the subject. That night I researched online. The Restrepo building, built in 1943. Private clinic from 1951 to 1968. I found nothing about the closure. There were no articles, no accessible digital records. Bogota in the mid-20th century was not well documented online. I went to the National Library Archive on a Saturday. It took me 3 hours to find something useful, a small note in a local newspaper from 1968. 4 lines. It said that the Restrepo Clinic had suspended operations by order of the health department after an unscheduled inspection. It didn't provide further details. An unscheduled inspection that closes a clinic is not a minor issue. That night, shortly after 1 in the morning, the knocks on the wall returned. But this time they came with something new. A voice. It wasn't a clear voice. It was more of a murmur, the kind of sound that one cannot distinctly identify from other nighttime noises unless paying attention. But I was paying attention. And what I heard, although I couldn't fully decipher it, had a cadence, a structure, the unmistakable rhythm of words. Someone, on the other side of that wall, which according to the plans did not lead to any habitable space, was speaking. I got up. I pressed my ear directly against the cold adobe. The words remained indecipherable, but the smell was there again. Stronger this time. Old incense. Something sweet beneath it. Something I couldn't name but that caused me physical discomfort. A queasiness in my stomach that had no rational cause. I knocked on the wall 3 times with my knuckles. The murmuring stopped immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. Neither the normal noises of the building nor the distant traffic from the street. Just silence. And then, from the other side of the wall, 3 knocks responded to mine. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next day I went to see Mrs. Carmen with a different attitude. I didn't ask her about pipes or humidity. I directly told her that I knew the building had been a clinic and that I wanted to know what was behind the wall of my apartment. Mrs. Carmen looked at me for a moment that stretched uncomfortably. "A storage room," she finally said. "It's sealed. It's been sealed for years." "Why sealed?" "Structural problems," she said. "It's not safe to enter." "I want to see it." "There's no access from your apartment." "Where is there access?" Another silence. "Marcos," Mrs. Carmen said, and something in the tone with which she said my name alerted me. "There are things about this building that are better left undisturbed. Do you understand me? It's been this way for years and it should stay that way." "What happened in that clinic?" I asked directly. Doña Carmen lowered her gaze to her papers. "The doctor in charge was doing things he shouldn't," she said in a very low voice. "That's all I know, and it's all you need to know." She didn't say anything else, and it was clear that the conversation was over. That afternoon, I spoke with the man from 4A. I knocked on his door with little hope, because in weeks of neighborliness, we had exchanged no more than 4 words. He opened the door with a look of surprise or perhaps annoyance. It was hard to tell on his face. I told him I had questions about the building. I waited for him to close the door on me. Instead, he looked at me for a moment, stepped aside, and let me in. His apartment was a mirror of mine, same size, same layout. But where I had the problematic wall, he had a huge built-in closet that took up that entire section. "How long have you been here?" I asked him. 11 years, he said. "Have you heard things? At night?" The man, who never told me his name, was silent for a moment. Then he nodded, barely, a movement almost imperceptible. "The first few years, yes," he said. "After that, you learn not to listen." "What's behind that wall?" "A room," he said. "A room that was active when this was a clinic. The doctor used it for things that weren't medicine." "What kind of things?" The man looked at me with an expression that mixed weariness with something that could very well be tightly controlled fear. "The doctor was a spiritualist," he said. "The real kind, not the fairground type. He had patients who came for medicine and ended up in that room participating in things they didn't understand. When the health department arrived, they found records, sessions, things that didn't match any medical treatment. They closed the clinic, prosecuted the doctor, sealed the room, and what was left inside. What always remains, he simply said, when a door is opened that one doesn't know how to close properly. That night, armed with the most powerful flashlight I found at a nearby hardware store, I searched my apartment more carefully than ever. I measured the walls, I measured the space, and I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. Between my back wall and the building's exterior structure, there was a difference of almost 80 centimeters that did not correspond to the normal thickness of adobe. There was space there, real space, and that space had to have access from somewhere. I found it in the bathroom, behind the medicine cabinet mirror, which turned out to be a wooden door painted the same color as the wall, almost invisible if not looked for. It was closed with a rusty latch, the kind that opens from the inside and the outside. Logic told me to leave it alone, to call Mrs. Carmen to report the discovery, to not get my hands into something that had clearly been sealed for a reason. Logic told me all that very clearly. I opened the latch. The door gave way with a long, rough sound, as if the hinges had not been used for decades. On the other side was complete darkness and the smell, now concentrated, dense, almost suffocating. Incense, somewhat sweet, something beneath that which was harder to identify. Something that smelled, if I had to put a word to it, like time stopped. I entered with the flashlight. The room was small, about 4 meters by 3. The walls were covered with dark paper that had once had a pattern and was now so worn that it was impossible to distinguish it. In the center was a wooden table with remnants of completely burned candles, turned into small solidified pools of black wax. Around the table, 3 chairs. On the walls, at a height of 1 meter from the floor, there were marks drawn with something dark. They were not letters. They were not figures I could recognize. They were symbols that had a precise, repeated geometry, like a language I did not know. In a corner on the floor there was a small wooden box, the size of a shoebox, closed with a metal clasp. I approached the table. The chairs were positioned precisely around it, not pushed, not randomly, but placed deliberately, as if the last session had ended orderly and no one had returned afterward. The smell was almost unbearable near the table. And then I heard the murmur. It wasn't coming from the walls this time. It came from the very air of the room, from no specific point, and from all at once. Words that remained indecipherable, in a language I didn't recognize, with a cadence that had something hypnotic in the worst possible sense. The kind of sound that makes the mind want to follow it, trace it, find its origin, even though something deeper and instinctive screams to get out. I turned towards the door. It was closed. I hadn't closed it. I had left it open, but it was closed. I pushed. It didn't give. I pushed harder. Nothing. The murmur intensified. At that moment I made a decision that was not rational but purely physical. I screamed. I pounded on the door with both fists with all the strength I had and kept hitting it non-stop, not caring about the noise, not caring about anything else. The door opened. On the other side was the man from 4A, with a serious expression, in pajamas, with the latch in hand. He must have opened it from the other side because my door also connected to the mirror in his bathroom, something neither of us knew. I left the room. I leaned against the bathroom wall, breathing heavily. "I told you," said the man from 4A. "One learns not to listen." He helped me sit on the edge of the bathtub. Neither of us spoke for a moment. "What is in there?" I asked him when I could speak normally. "I don't know for sure," he said. "But the doctor spent years opening doors in that room, inviting things. And when they closed it quickly, without doing what needed to be done to close it properly. What needs to be done to close it properly?" The man looked at me for a moment. "I don't know," he said, "and I don't want to know. I left the Restrepo building 2 weeks later. I left most of the furniture. I canceled the contract with Mrs. Carmen, who did not protest or ask for reasons, which told me more than any explanation could have told me. I found a new apartment in another neighborhood, modern, built 10 years ago, with no history at all. That was 2 years ago. I haven't been back to that area of the center. Sometimes when I have to pass nearby for work, I take a detour. I had the dreams for a few months after I left. Always the same room, the same chairs around the same table, the same black candles. I would wake up with the smell still in my nose even though I was kilometers away from that building. Over time, the dreams diminished. Now they hardly come. But there are nights, for no apparent reason, when I wake up at 2 in the morning completely alert. And in the silence of my new apartment, in the building with no history, I hear, very far away, almost inaudible, almost possibly imagined, 3 knocks. Always 3. This is the account of Marcos. He wrote to me that he never returned to see what was inside that wooden box in the corner of the room. He says it is the only decision from that night that he does not regret. There are places that accumulate things that should not be accumulated, and doors that are better left unopened, even if curiosity weighs more than fear. If you have ever experienced something in a place with a dark history, tell me in the comments. I would love to read your experience. And if you like this story and haven't subscribed yet, I invite you to do so. There are many more waiting. Have a peaceful night. This story was sent to me by a follower named Patricia, who worked as a librarian at a private university. What she experienced during a nighttime inventory made her quit her job and move to another city. If you've ever felt like a book is watching you, let me know in the comments. Now, this is Patricia's experience with a grimoire that should never have come into human hands. My name is Patricia, and for 5 years I worked as a librarian at San Agustin University, a private institution in Guanajuato, Mexico. It was a quiet job that I loved, organizing books, helping students with their research, spending hours among shelves full of knowledge. I never imagined that this love for books would almost cost me my sanity. It all started when the university received a massive donation of old books. A private collector had passed away without heirs, and his will specified that his entire library should be donated to our institution. There were over 3,000 volumes, some dating back to the 16th century. My supervisor, Dr. Mendez, was ecstatic. Patricia, this is incredible. We have first editions, original manuscripts, incunabula. We will need weeks to catalog all of this properly. The books arrived in wooden boxes on a cargo truck on a Tuesday in September. We unloaded them in the basement of the library, where we had a special room for old materials with temperature and humidity control. There were so many boxes that we could barely move between them. We will start the inventory this weekend, announced Dr. Mendez. Patricia, I will pay you overtime if you can come on Saturday night. We will work in shifts to progress faster. I accepted without thinking. The extra money would be good for me, and the idea of being the first to examine those bibliographic treasures was exciting. On Saturday, I arrived at the library at 8 in the evening. The building was empty and silent, illuminated only by emergency lights in the hallways. Dr. Mendez was already in the basement, surrounded by open boxes and piles of books. Perfect, Patricia. I've been cataloging for 2 hours and I've barely made progress. There are real gems here. Look at this. She showed me a book bound in red leather, a first edition of Don Quixote from 1605. Can you believe it? We worked in silence during the early hours, each at her station, recording titles, authors, publication dates, and condition. Most of the books were religious texts, philosophical works, and some ancient scientific treatises. Fascinating but normal for an 18th century collection. Around 11 at night, I opened a box that was marked with a strange symbol instead of a number. Inside were only 5 books, all individually wrapped in black cloth. Unwrapping the first, I found a thin volume bound in something that looked like leather, but had a strange, almost scaly texture. It had no title on the cover. I opened it carefully and saw that the pages were made of yellowed parchment, covered with handwritten Latin. There were illustrations too, circles with symbols, complex geometric figures, and drawings of creatures that were neither completely human nor animal. Dr. Mendez, you should see this, I called. She approached, put on her reading glasses, and examined the book. Her expression changed from curiosity to discomfort. It's a grimoire, she finally said. A book of ceremonial magic, probably from the 17th century. I see references to invocations, protection rituals, demonic seals. Fascinating from a historical standpoint, though chilling. Is it dangerous to have it? She laughed. Only if you believe in magic, Patricia. For us, it's simply a historical artifact that shows the beliefs of the time, but let's catalog it carefully. This type of text is rare and valuable. I continued examining the book, trying to decipher the Latin with my limited knowledge. There were sections on invoking spirits, creating amulets, curses. One page in particular caught my attention. It had the illustration of a mirror surrounded by symbols, and below, written in red ink that seemed to be blood, there was a warning in Old Spanish. Whoever reads these words aloud will open the door. What comes cannot be returned. A chill ran through me, but I attributed it to the air conditioning in the basement. I kept flipping through the pages, documenting each section. Then I reached a part of the book where the pages were stuck together, sealed with black wax that had a printed symbol. It was as if someone had wanted to ensure that those pages were never read. Curiosity got the better of me. Using a conservation spatula, I began to carefully separate the sealed pages. The wax broke with a dry crack that resonated in the silence of the basement. The moment the pages opened, the temperature in the room dropped drastically. My breath became visible. The lights flickered. "What was that?" Dr. Mendez asked, looking up from her work. "I don't know. I think there's a problem with the air conditioning system." But I knew it wasn't that. There was something different in the air. A pressure, a density that hadn't been there before. And a smell. Sulfur mixed with something sweet and rotten. I looked at the pages I had opened. They contained a ritual, written in Latin, but with some words in a language I didn't recognize. There were detailed instructions, a circle that needed to be drawn, words that needed to be spoken, and in the center of the page, written in large letters, "Invocation of the Dark Mirror." Without thinking, without really realizing what I was doing, I began to read the words aloud. It wasn't classical Latin, but something older, more guttural. The words flowed from my mouth with a strange ease, as if I had known them my whole life. "Patricia, what are you doing?" Dr. Mendez's voice sounded distant, even though she was only 3 meters away. I couldn't stop. The words kept flowing, my voice taking on an intonation that wasn't mine. I completed the invocation, pronounced the last syllable, and then absolute silence. The lights stopped flickering. The temperature remained cold but stable. I looked at Dr. Mendez, who was watching me with a worried expression. "Are you feeling okay? You turned very pale." Yes, I don't know what happened to me. It was like I couldn't control my voice. "I think we should take a break. We've been working for hours. Let's go up for coffee." I closed the grimoire, feeling stupid and embarrassed. What had I done? Reading aloud a ritual from an ancient book of magic as if it were something real. It was ridiculous. We went up to the first floor where there was a small cafe for staff. While Dr. Mendez made coffee, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. I looked normal. Same face, same brown hair tied in a ponytail, same brown eyes. Except that for a second, just a second, I saw something different in the reflection. My eyes were not brown. They were completely black. I blinked and everything returned to normal. Just tiredness, I told myself. Too many hours staring at ancient text under artificial light. We returned to the basement with our coffee. Dr. Mendez suggested we leave the grimoires for last and focus on the more conventional texts. I agreed, grateful to postpone working with those unsettling books. We worked in silence for another hour. Then I heard something. A soft whisper, as if someone were speaking in the adjacent room. I stopped, listening intently. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Dr. Mendez shook her head. "What thing?" "Voices. Like whispers. Probably the ventilation system. This building is old. It makes strange noises at night." But the whispers continued, and now I could distinguish that they were words, although in a language I didn't understand. They were coming from all directions at once, surrounding me. I got up, searching for the source of the sound. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and then I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the back wall of the basement, where there were no windows or mirrors, a reflection had appeared. It was as if an invisible mirror was there, showing an image that did not correspond with reality. The reflection showed the same basement but different, darker, with the walls covered in symbols that glowed with a sickly light. And in that reflected basement, there were figures. Humanoid shadows moving, seeming to be working on something, preparing something. "Dr. Mendez, do you see that?" I pointed toward the wall. She looked. "See what? It's just the wall. The reflection, the figures." "Patricia, there's nothing there. I think you really need to rest. You've been working too much." But I saw it clearly. And now one of the figures had turned towards me, looking directly at me. It had no face, just a darkness where features should have been. It raised a hand, pointing at me. I stepped back, tripping over a box. The sudden movement caused the grimoire I had been examining to fall to the ground, opening to the pages of the ritual I had read. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, I heard Dr. Mendez's voice. "Patricia, where is your flashlight? Mine won't turn on." I took out my cell phone to use the screen light, but it was dead even though it had a full battery when we went down. I fumbled for my emergency flashlight. When I finally turned it on, I illuminated the basement. Dr. Mendez was standing near her workstation, looking around in confusion. But behind her, on the wall that had previously shown the strange reflection, there was now a real mirror. A large, ornate mirror that definitely hadn't been there before. "Doctor, turn slowly," I said in a trembling voice. She turned and saw the mirror. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock. That wasn't there 5 minutes ago. We approached cautiously. The mirror was old, with a carved wooden frame bearing the same symbols I had seen in the grimoire. The surface of the glass was dark, not reflecting clearly like a normal mirror. The images in it were distorted, blurry, and as we looked, the reflection changed. Instead of showing the basement with the two of us, it displayed a completely different place. A vast and dark space, illuminated only by what appeared to be glowing embers. And in that space, things were moving. Creatures that were vaguely humanoid, but completely wrong in their proportions and movements. "We need to get out of here now," Dr. Mendez said. "This is not natural. I will call security, the rector, whoever is necessary." We ran to the basement door, but when we tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The doorknob turned, but the door remained sealed, as if something was keeping it shut from the other side. "Help!" shouted Dr. Mendez, banging on the door. "Is there someone up there?" There was no response. The building was empty except for us, and the thick walls of the basement were probably blocking any sound. Behind us we heard a sound like glass breaking. We turned and saw that the mirror had cracked, but the cracks were not normal. They formed patterns, the same symbols from the grimoire, and through the cracks, something was coming out. It was smoke at first, black and dense, flowing from the mirror like water. Then the smoke began to solidify, to take shape. It condensed into a humanoid figure about 2 meters tall, but with limbs that extended too far, with joints bending in the wrong directions. The creature had no face, just a smooth surface where features should have been. But I could feel it watching us, evaluating us. "What is that?" whispered Dr. Mendez, her voice barely audible. I didn't have time to respond. The creature moved incredibly fast, crossing the basement in an instant. It grabbed Dr. Mendez by the arm. She screamed, trying to free herself, but the grip was like iron. "Let her go!" I shouted, grabbing the first thing I found, a heavy metal-bound book, and hitting the creature. The book passed through its form as if it were smoke. It wasn't completely solid. The creature released Dr. Mendez, who fell to the ground, rubbing her arm. Where the creature had touched her, her skin was darkened, like frostbite or a burn. Then the creature spoke, not with sound but directly in our minds. "It was you who opened the door, you who spoke the words. Now we must complete the exchange." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, although a part of me knew exactly what he was referring to. The ritual I had read, summoning of the dark mirror. I had invoked something. I had opened a door between our world and another place. A soul for knowledge. That is the price. It has always been the price. I didn't ask for knowledge. I don't want anything from you. The words were spoken. The seal was broken. The deal is done. Choose, you or her. Dr. Mendez looked at me with terrified eyes. I was maybe 30 years old. She was 62, close to retirement, had grandchildren. But the idea of offering someone else, of condemning another person for my mistake. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not going to choose. There has to be another way." The creature tilted its faceless head as if considering. "There is an alternative. If you can close the door you opened, if you can reverse the summoning before dawn, but you will fail. Everyone fails." "How? How do you close it?" The creature pointed towards the grimoire on the ground. "The answers are where it all began. But you must be wiser than you have been." And with that, the creature dissolved back into smoke, retreating back into the mirror. But the mirror remained, and through it we could see that dark place, those shapes moving in the shadows. I helped Dr. Mendez to get up. "Are you okay?" "My arm hurts horribly, but I'll live." "Patricia, what have you done?" "I read the ritual from the grimoire. I didn't think it was real. We need to reverse it. We have until dawn. She looked at her watch. It's 12:30. The sun rises around 7. We have 6.5 hours. We retrieved the grimoire and took it to the table farthest from the mirror. With trembling hands, I began to search through the pages I had opened. There had to be a way to undo what I had done. I found a section marked reversal and sealing. I read carefully, translating the Latin as best as I could. It required several components: salt, holy water, the blood of the summoner, and the correct words spoken in the right order, at exactly midnight the following night. Wait, I said. This says midnight the following night. Does that mean we have to wait until tomorrow? Dr. Mendez read over my shoulder. No, look at the margin note. It's in Spanish. It says, if invoked at the wrong hour, the reversal must be completed by the next midnight within the same lunar cycle. Today is a new moon. The next midnight within the cycle is in 6 hours. We had the necessary components or could obtain them. There was a chapel on campus where we could get holy water. The salt was easy. And blood, that would be the hardest part. But it was my blood that was required. I'll go for the holy water, Dr. Mendez said. The chapel is in the humanities building. I can get there in 10 minutes if I can get out of this basement. As if it had hurt her, the basement door swung open. But what was on the other side was not the normal library hallway. It was darkness, the same darkness we had seen in the mirror. We can't go out that way, I said. It's a trap. We explored the basement, looking for another exit. There was a high ventilation window in a wall, barely large enough for a thin person to pass through. Using stacked boxes as a ladder, Dr. Mendez managed to open it and escape. I'll be back in 30 minutes, she promised. You stay here, study the ritual, prepare everything. And Patricia, be careful. She left, leaving me alone in the basement with the mirror and whatever was lurking behind it. I spent the next half hour studying the reversal ritual intensely. The words had to be exact, the order specific, the tone correct. One mistake and I would fail, or worse, I could open the door even wider. I prepared the space according to the instructions. I drew a protection circle on the floor using chalk I found in an educational supply, placed candles at specific points around the circle, organized the symbols I would have to copy. As I worked, the mirror pulsed with sickly light. Things on the other side were closing in, pressing against the barrier between worlds. I could feel their hunger, their desire to cross completely. Dr. Mendez returned just before 1 in the morning, bringing a bottle of holy water from the chapel and a packet of salt from the cafeteria. She also brought bandages and alcohol. For your blood, she explained, we will need to sterilize the cut. At 1:30, everything was ready. There were 5 hours left until midnight, the moment when we would have to perform the reversal ritual. But the following hours were the longest of my life. The mirror became more active as time passed. The shapes behind it became more defined, more solid, and they began to speak, whispering promises and threats. Just let us cross. We will give you power, knowledge, everything you desire. Your soul is lost anyway. At least accept our gifts before the end. She will die if you fail. Both will die. Join us willingly, and you will live forever. I tried to ignore them, but the voices filtered into my mind, planting doubts. What if I failed? What if I condemned Dr. Mendez for my mistake? Maybe it would be better to accept the deal. Let them take me. At least save her. Don't listen to them, Dr. Mendez said firmly. They are lies. Entities like these offer nothing but destruction. At 6 in the morning, there was 1 hour left. The tension was unbearable. The mirror was now visibly vibrating, cracks forming in the frame. It wouldn't last much longer. If we didn't seal the door soon, it would completely break, and what was on the other side would flood our world. Finally, at 6:55, we began the final preparations. I cut the palm of my hand with a sterilized scalpel, letting my blood drip into a small container. I mixed the blood with the holy water and salt according to the instructions. At exactly 7 o'clock, I began the ritual, standing in the center of the protection circle with Dr. Mendez holding the open grimoire for me to read. I pronounced the words of reversal. This time the words did not flow easily. Each syllable required effort, as if something was trying to prevent me from saying them. The air thickened, resisting. The candles flickered violently. The mirror reacted immediately. The cracks expanded. The shapes behind the glass lunged against the barrier, trying to break it before I completed the ritual. The basement trembled as if in an earthquake. "Continue!" shouted Dr. Mendez over the roar of energy that filled the space. I continued reciting, word by word, pouring the mixture of blood, holy water, and salt at the specific points of the circle. The grimoire specified that I had to complete everything before the last grain of sand fell in an hourglass I had set up. There were perhaps 30 seconds left. The last words came out of my mouth just as the last grain of sand fell. There was a flash of blinding light, a sound like 1,000 crystals breaking, and a wave of force that threw both of us against the walls. When I regained consciousness, I was lying on the floor. Everything was silent. The normal light of dawn was coming through the ventilation window. The candles had gone out. The circle of protection was broken. And the mirror was gone. Only the normal wall remained, with no trace that it had ever been there. "Did it work?" I asked weakly. Dr. Mendez, slowly getting up, examined the grimoire. The pages she had opened were now blank, as if the ink had been absorbed. The wax seal had reformed, sealing those pages again. "I think so," she replied. "You closed the door. Whatever you invoked has been returned." We spent the next few hours cleaning the basement, removing any evidence of the ritual. We placed the grimoire in the special box where it had been, this time making sure it was clearly marked as "Do Not Open, Hazardous Material." When the regular employees arrived on Monday, they found the basement perfectly organized with hundreds of books already cataloged. They never knew what had happened that weekend. But both Dr. Mendez and I knew the truth. We had brushed against something dark, something that existed on the margins of reality, waiting to be invited to cross over. I finished the semester but resigned before the next one. I couldn't keep working surrounded by books, especially old books, without remembering. Without asking myself what other forbidden knowledge was hidden in those pages, what other doors could be opened with the wrong words. Dr. Mendez retired early. The day she left, she gave me one last piece of advice. "There is knowledge that is not meant to be discovered, Patricia. Limits that exist for reasons." What we learned that weekend is that not everything written in ancient books is fiction, and some doors are closed because what is behind them must remain there. I never went back to work in a library. Now I teach elementary school surrounded by children's storybooks and basic math. It's simple, it's safe, and every night before I sleep, I check that there are no mirrors in my room, because sometimes, in the reflection, I think I see shadows that shouldn't be there, shapes that watch me from the other side, reminding me that the door is closed, but the things on the other side still remember that it was once opened, and they are waiting, always waiting, in case someone makes the same mistake I made. And with that, the experience that Patricia shared with me concludes. She told me that she now lives in another city and completely avoids old bookstores. If you have ever felt that an old book emanated something more than the smell of old pages, share it in the comments. Sometimes knowledge has a price that we are not prepared to pay. Rest well, and see you in the next story. A few days ago, I received a message that I read several times before deciding to share it. It was sent to me by a woman named Rosa, who lives in a rural town and took almost 3 years to write it because, in her own words, putting it into text makes it more real. If you have something like that saved, something you haven't been able to tell anyone, write to me. I publish these stories because I believe they deserve to be heard. What Rosa experienced happened when she was young and went to spend the summer at her maternal grandmother's house, in a town where everyone knew each other, and where, as Rosa discovered, everyone knew things that no one spoke aloud. She was 19 years old when she went to spend the summer at her grandmother Petra's house. It was not the first time I had been to the village. As a child, I had gone several times with my parents, but it had been at least 5 years since I last returned. And in that time, I had changed enough to see the place with different eyes. I was no longer the girl who ran through the fields without asking anything. Now I was a young woman who observed, who noticed, who asked questions that sometimes made adults uncomfortable. The village was called Veredas. A strange name for a village, I always thought, as if someone had wanted to name not the place but the paths that led to it. There were about 300 people in winter, perhaps double in summer with those who returned for a visit. White, low houses, a church in the center, a square with 2 stone benches, and an orange tree so old that no one remembered having seen it grow. The kind of place where time passes differently. My grandmother Petra had lived alone since my grandfather had died years ago. She was a small and quiet woman, one of those who don't talk much, but when they do, they always say something worth listening to. She welcomed me with a long hug and a hot soup, and in the first few days, everything was exactly what I expected from that summer. Tranquility, dry heat, long afternoons on the porch, nights that smelled of earth and jasmine. It was in the second week when I started to notice things. The first was the neighbor. My grandmother Petra's house had an empty lot on the right, and another house on the left, separated only by a low dividing wall. The woman who lived there was named Dolores, although everyone in the village simply called her La Lola, with that article in front that in some villages is used with affection and in others with something that is not exactly affection. Lola was about 60 years old. She was tall for being from the village, from that generation, and moved with a particular slowness that did not seem like tiredness but deliberation, as if every movement she made had been considered before being executed. I had seen her a couple of times peeking over her side of the wall, watering her plants, and each time our eyes met, she quickly looked away first, as if looking directly at me was something she preferred to avoid. I asked my grandmother Petra about her one afternoon while we were shelling beans in the kitchen. My grandmother took a moment to respond. Her hands continued working with that automatic efficiency of someone who has shelled beans thousands of times. "Lola is Lola," she finally said, which was the kind of answer that didn't answer anything but seemed sufficient in that town. "Do you get along?" I insisted. "We respect each other," my grandmother said, and she changed the subject. That night, from my room that overlooked the side of the house where the party wall was, I heard Lola in her garden. It wasn't unusual for her to be outside at that hour. It was summer, and the heat made the night preferable to the day. But what I heard wasn't the sound of someone watering or sitting quietly. It was a murmur, continuous, low, with that specific rhythm of someone reciting something from memory. Like a prayer, I thought. But it wasn't the rhythm of a prayer that I recognized. It lasted maybe 20 minutes, then silence, and the sound of a door closing. I fell asleep thinking about it. The village market took place on Tuesday mornings in the square. It was small with 4 or 5 stalls, but everyone went because the market was not just a place to buy, but the place where the village informed itself. My grandmother Petra went every week without fail, and that first Tuesday she took me with her. It was there that I met Amparo. Amparo was my age, 19, and she was the granddaughter of one of the men who had a vegetable stall. She had been born in the village but had spent the last few years studying in the city just like me, and that created an immediate kind of common ground between us. We started talking while our grandmothers did their shopping, and by the time the market ended, we had already agreed to meet that afternoon. Amparo knew the town with that intimacy of someone who has grown up in it, but also with the critical distance of someone who has been away long enough to see it from the outside. She explained it to me on the way to the river that afternoon, as we walked along one of those paths through fields that the town had in abundance. "Veritas is a strange town," she said without preamble. "All small towns are strange," I said. "No, listen." She looked at me. "This town specifically has things that the others don't have. It has always had them. There are people here who do things that people prefer not to look too closely at." "What kind of things?" Amparo hesitated. Not like someone who doesn't know what to say, but like someone who knows exactly what to say and is weighing whether to say it. "Do you know your grandmother's neighbor?" she asked. "Lola." I stopped. "Yes," I said. "I've seen her a couple of times." "Has your grandmother told you anything about her?" "She told me that she is respected." Amparo let out a short laugh without humor. "That's exactly what your grandmother would say." She kept walking. "Lola has a reputation in the village. Not just now, always. Her mother had it too, and her mother's mother. There are people who go to see her when they have problems they don't know how to solve. And there are people who completely avoid her. And there are people like your grandmother who live next door and simply coexist, carefully." "Reputation for what exactly?" I asked, although I already had an idea. Amparo looked at me sideways. "For knowing things," she said. for being able to do things. For both. That night I asked my grandmother Petra directly. We were in the living room after dinner with the TV on but without sound as she usually left it, and I waited for that comfortable silence that settles between people who know each other well before speaking. Amparo told me things about Lola, I said. My grandmother did not change her expression. She continued looking at the screen. Amparo talks a lot, she said. Is it true what they say about her? Now she did look at me, with that attention of hers that was hard to maintain because it held something inside that I didn't know how to name, something old and precise. In this town, my grandmother Petra said, there are things that exist even if no one names them, and there are things that cease to exist if they are named too much. What Lola does is one of the former. And is that good or bad? My grandmother thought for a moment. It is what it is, she finally said. It has been what it is for generations. Before this town had that name, there was already someone like Lola in it. And as long as the town exists, there will continue to be someone. That is neither good nor bad. It is simply the way this place works. Have you ever asked her for anything? I asked. My grandmother looked at the screen again. Sleep, Rosa, she said, and that was the last time we talked about it directly. It was Amparo who told me more throughout that week, in fragments that she released with the naturalness of someone who has spent a lifetime hearing these things and no longer distinguishes when they are extraordinary. Lola, according to Amparo, was what people in the village called a healer, although that word was too simple and too innocent for what it really implied. Yes, she prepared remedies with plants, and yes, people went to her when the doctor from the nearby village did not provide satisfactory answers. But she also did other things. Some said she could undo evils. Others said she could cast evils, although they always said that in a low voice. She knew ways to intervene in matters that had no visible solution. Do you believe her? I asked Amparo one day. She considered the question seriously. I have seen things, he said. When I was a girl, the daughter of a neighbor fell very ill. The doctors didn't know what it was. The family went to see Lola. A week later, the girl was fine. He paused. It could have had a natural explanation. It probably did. But there are also other things I saw that have no natural explanation. So I don't know if I believe her exactly. What I know is that it doesn't seem wise to not believe her. It was a fine distinction, but I understood it perfectly. The event that changed everything happened on a Thursday night towards the end of the third week. My grandmother Petra had gone to bed early because she had a headache. I stayed in the living room reading late with the window open to the night heat and the sound of crickets outside filling the silence. It was one of those perfect summer nights that make the world seem calm and whole. Around 11:30 I heard footsteps on the street. It wasn't unusual. Although the town was small, there were people who went out for walks at night to escape the heat. But these footsteps stopped in front of the house. And then I heard a soft knock on the door. Not an urgent or loud knock. 3 discreet taps, with knuckles. I approached the door. I hesitated for a moment. Who is it? I said without opening. It's Lola, said the voice from the other side. I need to talk to your grandmother. I opened the door. Lola was standing in the doorway with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not exactly fear, because it seemed to me that Lola was not someone who got scared easily. It was something more like the intense worry of someone who has assessed a situation and determined that it requires immediate attention. My grandmother has a migraine, I said. She is sleeping. Wake her up, Lola said. It's important. There was something in her voice that made me go without questioning it further. I woke up my grandmother Petra. She sat up in bed, looked at me, and by the way she did it, I knew she understood without me saying anything that something had changed. Lola? She said. Yes. My grandmother got up, put on her robe, and went to the living room. I heard them talking from the hallway, not because I was actively eavesdropping, but because the house was small and the voices traveled. I couldn't hear everything, just fragments. Lola spoke in a low and fast voice, and my grandmother responded with monosyllables and short questions. What I did understand was this. Lola had seen something that night at the edge of town, on the road that led to the fields in the east. It wasn't clear to me exactly what she had seen, but the urgency with which she described it was sufficiently eloquent. After about 20 minutes, my grandmother came to the hallway. Go to your room, Rosa, she said to me. What's going on? Nothing that concerns you tonight. She looked at me. And don't open the window. Keep it closed until tomorrow. Grandma, Rosa. Her voice had that tone that allowed no negotiation. Go to your room and close the window. I went. I closed the window. I sat on the bed listening. Lola was at the house until after midnight. I heard them moving around. I heard the sound of the kitchen, a smell of something heating up that I didn't recognize. It wasn't any of the things my grandmother normally cooked. And at one moment, briefly, I heard the two women reciting something in unison, with that rhythm I had already heard from Lola in her garden, but now clearer and more intentional. Then silence. The door. Lola's footsteps fading down the street, and my grandmother gently knocking on my door. It's done, she said from outside. You can sleep peacefully. What was it? I asked. A long pause. Something that had come too close. My grandmother said, It's gone now. I didn't sleep well that night, but I didn't hear anything else either. The next day, Amparo noticed that I had something different on my face, that expression of someone who has witnessed something they don't know how to classify, and she asked me directly what had happened. I told her everything. The footsteps, the 3 knocks, the conversation I couldn't hear completely, the strange smell from the kitchen, the quiet recitation of the 2 women. Amparo listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly. Near the East Road? She asked. That's what I understood, yes. That road has history, she said. The people of the town don't use it at night. They haven't used it for a long time. She looked at me. There's an old story about that road, about something that has frequented it for generations. I don't know if it's true. It's one of those things that are told, and no one knows where they started. But what I know is that people here avoid it at night for very specific reasons. What kind of story, Ame? I asked. Amparo took a while to respond. Someone made a deal on that road a long time ago, he said. Not someone from now, someone from before, when the village was much smaller and the things that were in those fields were still more accessible. The deal was to get something, land, harvest. I don't know exactly the details. And what was received in exchange for the deal keeps coming to collect. He paused. That's what they say. And what Lola, and before her, her mother, and before her, her grandmother, takes care of managing. I processed it in silence. Does my grandmother know? I finally said. Your grandmother has been living next to Lola for 70 years, Amparo said. What do you think? I didn't ask my grandmother Petra about that night anymore. She also didn't mention it again. We continued with the summer routine, mornings at the market, afternoons on the porch, nights with the TV on mute, as if nothing had changed. But I had changed the way I looked at things. I started to notice details that I would have ignored before. The specific plants that grew in Lola's garden, some of which I had seen drying in bundles in my grandmother's kitchen without asking her what they were for. The discreet marks on the threshold of my grandmother's door, traced with something that was periodically renewed because the color changed. The way Lola and my grandmother greeted each other when they crossed paths. A brief gesture with the hand that was not exactly a casual greeting, but something more coded, more deliberate. A language I understood. A language between people who shared knowledge that was not discussed out loud. The last week of my stay, Lola called me from her side of the dividing wall. I was in the garden, watering my grandmother's plants while she rested, and Lola's voice reached me calm and direct. Rosa. I approached the wall. Lola was standing on the other side, with that way of hers of being completely still, like something that doesn't need to move to show that it is present. Yes, I said. She looked at me for a moment, with that direct gaze she had avoided in the first weeks. Now she didn't avoid it. You have your grandmother's eyes, she said. Not your mother's. Your grandmother's. I didn't know how to respond. It was a strange observation, but there was something in the way she said it that suggested it wasn't a comment about physical resemblance. Your grandmother is a good woman, Lola continued. She has been a good neighbor. She has understood what needs to be understood, and has left in peace what needs to be left in peace. Not everyone knows how to do that. What needs to be understood? I asked. Lola held my gaze. There are things that have been here longer than us, she said, and that will be here longer than our grandchildren. And the way to live with that is not to ignore it or confront it. It's knowing when to act and when to stay still. She paused. You have that, she said. I've seen it since you arrived. And without further ado, she returned to her plants. That night I told my grandmother Petra. I told her exactly what Lola had said to me, word for word. My grandmother listened to me, and when I finished, for the first time that entire summer, she looked at me with an expression that was not the usual one, not the practical and silent woman. It was something more open, something that resembled, if I'm not mistaken, relief. Lola doesn't say those things to just anyone, she said. What does it mean? My grandmother thought for a long moment. It means that when I'm not here, she finally said, she's going to need someone, and she believes that someone could be you. The silence that followed was one of those silences that changed the weight of everything within it. I returned to the city in September. I didn't talk about that summer with anyone, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to start. There are experiences that don't have a natural format in everyday language, that require a context that most people don't have, and telling them without that context risks making them sound like something other than what they are. I returned to Veritas the following summer and the next one. Each time I spent more time with Lola, not formally, not as a student with a teacher, but in the natural way that certain things are transmitted, through observation and presence and conversation that doesn't always seem like conversation. I learned about plants. I learned to read certain signs in animal behavior and in climate changes that were not related to meteorology. I learned to recognize when the eastern path should be avoided and when it was calm. I learned the greeting gesture that Lola and my grandmother used with each other and what it meant. My grandmother Petra died 2 years ago. She passed away peacefully in her bed in the early morning, in the way that people who have done their job well in life die. When I went to Veritas for the burial, Lola was waiting for me on the porch of her house. She didn't hug me. That wasn't her style. She just looked at me as I walked past her door. "When you're ready," she said. Nothing more. I understood what she meant. That was 2 years ago. I still don't know if I'm ready, but I keep going back to Veritas. And the road to the east, for now, remains quiet. Although there are nights when the heat is intense, and the air has that specific smell I've learned to recognize, when I know it won't stay quiet forever, and when that moment comes, I'm going to have to know what to do. That's all I can share for now. That was what Rosa wrote to me. At the end of the message, she added that she continues to go to Veritas every summer, and that Lola is still there. She didn't give me more details, and the truth is that I don't need them either. There are stories that hold up better with what is not said. If anything Rosa shared feels familiar to you, if you grew up in a place where there were people like Lola, or where certain things were known without being named, I would love for you to leave it in the comments. Those stories also deserve to be told. Take care tonight. We'll hear from each other in the next story. I have a personal rule. When someone writes to me, and the first thing they say is that it took them years to tell this to someone, I read it all before doing anything else. That's what Isabel did when she wrote to me a month ago. Librarian, 31 years old, a person who spends her days surrounded by books, and who grew up believing that books are exactly what they seem. Paper, ink, words. What she found in a donation lot changed that conviction in ways she is still processing. If you have a similar experience with an object, with something you brought into your life without knowing what it carried, I would like to read about it in the comments. But first, listen to what happened to Isabel. I have been working in a library since I was 23 years old. I started as an assistant, organizing returns and sticking barcodes on the spines of books, and I slowly moved up with the patience that a place where time passes differently than in other jobs teaches you. Libraries have their own rhythm, slow and constant, and that rhythm suited me. I am one of those people who need silence to think, and few professions offer as much sustained silence as this one. At 31, I was in charge of acquisitions and cataloging at the Benito Juarez Municipal Library, which is a long name for a medium-sized place. 4 rooms, about 40,000 volumes, a section of historical newspapers that no one consulted but that the budget couldn't cover for digitization, and a staff of 6 people including German, the director. German had been in the position for 18 years. He was a methodical man of few words who managed the library with the same silent efficiency with which it operated, and with whom I had a relationship of mutual respect built over years of frictionless work. We weren't exactly friends, but we understood each other. The lot arrived in March, in the second year of my role as acquisitions manager. Donations are a regular part of the work in any public library. People dismantle personal libraries when they move, when someone dies, or when they simply decide that books take up too much space, and many times they end up with us. Most lots are collections of popular novels from decades past, outdated encyclopedias, technical manuals for trades that are no longer practiced, useful sometimes, interesting rarely, surprising almost never. Don Severo's lot was different from the very first moment. Don Severo Castellanos was an 82-year-old man who lived alone in a house in the historic center and had spent decades collecting books with the quiet obsession of collectors who do not seek economic value, but something more personal and difficult to name. When he called to offer the donation, he spoke directly with German and told him that he wanted to get rid of his library because he could no longer take care of it as it deserved and preferred that the books be in a place where someone would attend to them. German sent me to do the inventory. Don Severo's house was exactly what one expects from a solitary 82-year-old collector. Books on all available surfaces, on shelves that covered the walls from floor to ceiling, in piles on the floor, in boxes stacked in the hallways. The smell was that of old paper and ink, with a hint of controlled humidity that I recognized as the scent of books well preserved for a long time. Don Severo received me with a formal courtesy, the kind that belongs to another generation, and he took me through the different rooms explaining what was there. He was a thin man, with slow but precise movements and very light eyes that observed with an attention that felt, from the beginning, slightly uncomfortable. Not in a threatening way, just as if he were examining me more than usual. I spent the morning cataloging. It was an extraordinary lot, 19th century editions, some incunabula from the 18th, treatises on botany, natural history, philosophy, theology. The kind of collection that one sees very rarely in this work, and that makes the acquisition budget seem completely irrelevant, because no amount of money would have sufficed to put something like this together. It was at the end of the morning, in the last room, when I found the book. He was alone on a small shelf, separated from the others, on a ledge that, unlike the rest of the house, was dust-free. As if someone cleaned it regularly, it was a medium-sized volume, bound in dark leather with no title on the spine, featuring initials embossed on the cover that did not correspond to any classification system I knew. I took it, as I had taken dozens of books that morning, and opened it. The interior was in Latin, with some sections in what seemed to be another, older language that I did not recognize. The pages were made of a different paper than the rest of the collection, denser, heavier, of that dark ivory color that very old manuscripts have. The illustrations were engravings in black ink, geometric figures intertwined with representations that took me a while to identify as human figures in various positions, some of which were disturbing once you understood them. Don Severo entered the room at that moment. He looked at me with the book in his hands, and something in his expression changed. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight contraction around the eyes, something that in another person would have been called alarm, but in him was so controlled that it was hardly noticeable. "Is that book also included in the lot?" I asked. Don Severo took a moment before answering. "Yes," he said, and then he added, in a tone that was meant to be casual but wasn't entirely, "That book requires special care, temperature and humidity conditions. It cannot be in general circulation." I told him we would put it in the reserved funds section, which had the appropriate conditions for delicate materials. He nodded, and then, when I was about to close the book to note it in the inventory, he placed his hand on the cover, with a gentle firmness that was actually an indication for me to stop. "Don't carry it open," he said. "Neither here, nor on the way. Keep it closed until it's in the place where it will be stored." I looked at him. "Why?" Don Severo looked me in the eyes for a second that felt longer than it was. "The illustrations are delicate with direct light," he said. "The ink reacts." It was a completely reasonable technical explanation for a book of that age. I accepted it, but there was something in the way he had said it that didn't fit with the technical explanation, something more urgent underneath. I closed the book and wrapped it in the archival paper I had for special materials. The shipment arrived at the library the next day in 3 large boxes. The first thing I did was separate Don Severo's book and take it directly to the reserve funds storage, as I had promised. I placed it on one of the special material shelves in a pH-neutral conservation box and registered it in the system with a provisional description because the Latin inside would require more careful cataloging work than usual. I forgot about it for a week. There were 43 more boxes from the shipment to catalog, plus the regular acquisitions work, and that book was just one of several that would require specialized attention at some point in the future. It was German who mentioned it first. He called me to his office one afternoon in the second week after the donation. He had the book open on his desk and was looking at it with an expression that I described to myself as genuine bewilderment. "Did you review this?" he asked when I entered. "Just briefly, at Don Severo's house. It's in Latin. It needs translation work before it can be properly catalogued. Look at this." German pointed to one of the pages with illustrations. I leaned closer and looked. The illustration he was pointing to was an engraving of a central figure, larger than the others, with features that I had not noticed in my initial quick review. It was a figure that combined human traits with something else, traits that the engraving depicted with extraordinary technical precision, and that were disturbing not because they were grotesque, but because they were too detailed, too specific, as if the one who had drawn them knew them firsthand. "Do you know what this is?" German asked. "A treaty of some kind. Perhaps theological or philosophical. There's a lot from the 18th century that uses this kind of illustrations." "I looked for the initials on the cover," German said. "I didn't find any catalog that records it. No library, no archive, nothing. It could be a unique manuscript. Not all texts from that time are catalogued." German nodded, but not with the conviction of someone who accepts an explanation, but with that of someone who keeps thinking. "Close it and put it back," I said, because I suddenly remembered Don Severo's words, "Don't leave it open longer than necessary." German looked at me. "Why?" "The ink reacts with direct light. Don Severo's conservator mentioned it when I catalogued it." German closed the book. I took it back to the storage. That night in my apartment, I couldn't sleep well. It wasn't just one thing that kept me awake. It was an accumulation, the memory of Don Severo's expression when he saw me with the book in my hands, the instructions not to carry it open, the figure of the engraving that German had pointed out to me, and that I still saw when I closed my eyes, not clearly, just as a general impression, like when you look at something bright and the image remains imprinted on the retina, even though the light source is no longer there. I got up at 3 in the morning, made myself a tea, and searched the internet for anything related to the initials on the book cover. I spent 2 hours searching without results. Then I looked for demonological treatises from the 18th century with characteristics similar to what I remembered. I found general references, nothing specific. At 5 in the morning, I stopped searching and went to take a shower to get ready for work. On the third day after German had taken it out of the deposit, the small things began. The first was a smell. I was working in the reserved fund storage, cataloging other materials from Don Severo's batch, when I noticed a smell I didn't recognize immediately. Something between sulfur and something organic, warm, that didn't correspond to the usual smell of the storage. The storage of special materials has a characteristic smell: old paper, leather, the faint antiseptic of preservation products. This was different, denser, with a temperature that wasn't the temperature of the air but something more concentrated, as if it came from a specific point. I followed the smell. It led me to the shelf where the box with Don Severo's book was. I stopped in front of the shelf. The smell was stronger there. Not much stronger, just enough to be unmistakable. I took the box, opened it, checked that the book was closed. It was. I smelled it directly, bringing my nose close to the leather cover. The smell was coming from the book. I returned it to the box, closed the box, left the storage room, and sat at my desk for 5 minutes staring at the wall before doing anything else. I looked up Don Severo's number in the donation registry and called him that afternoon. He answered on the third ring with that formal elderly courtesy voice of his. I told him I had questions about the book. There was a silence that lasted perhaps 4 seconds, which in a phone conversation is a long silence. "What kind of questions?" he said. I told him about the smell. I asked him if he had noticed anything similar. Another silence. "Is the book in the restricted funds deposit?" he asked. "Yes, as we agreed." "Is it closed?" "Yes." "Good." A pause. "The smell is normal. It is not dangerous as long as the book is closed." "What is in that book, Don Severo?" Silence. "It is a text from the 17th century. Not the 18th, as you probably assumed. Older. He paused. It was compiled by someone who spent many years studying certain phenomena, documenting things he had observed. Another pause. The problem is that some of those phenomena were documented in a way that keeps them active within the text. I remained silent, processing that. Active how? I finally said. The text is not just a description, said Don Severo. It is also an invocation. Whoever compiled it did not distinguish between describing something and calling it. For him, there was no difference. A longer pause. The illustrations are particularly powerful. They should not be looked at for a prolonged time, especially those on the central pages. I thought of Kerman looking at the open book on his desk. How long did my director have it open? I asked. I don't know, Don Severo said. Why? Because when I saw it, it was open and he was looking at it. Another silence. This one with a different quality. How is he now? The question surprised me. Fine, I think. Normal. Good. Don Severo sounded slightly relieved. As long as it was for a short time, there shouldn't be any consequences. He paused. But Isabel, I need that book to remain closed, and I need no one else to open it without proper preparation. What kind of preparation? The kind I don't have time to give you now, and that in any case requires knowledge that can't be explained over the phone. I remained silent. Why did you donate it to me? I asked. If it's so dangerous, why did you send it to a public library? Don Severo took a while to respond. Because I am dying, he said, with the same calmness with which he could have said he was retiring. And that book needs care. It needs a place where someone can look after it, where the conditions are suitable, where there are people committed to preserving what is in their charge. Pause. A library seemed to him the safest place. Safer than what? Than in the hands of someone who would want to open it deliberately. That night I went to the library outside of hours, with the keys I had as the acquisitions manager, and went directly to the reserved funds storage. I took the book box and inspected it from the outside. It was closed as I had left it. I also wrapped it with a conservation polyethylene sheet that we had in the storage, tied it with tape, and labeled it with an internal note that said, "Fragile material. Do not open without authorization from the acquisitions manager." It was a ridiculously insufficient measure if what Don Severo had described to me was real, but it was what I had. German, in the following days, was different. Not in a way that someone outside our usual dynamic would have noticed. Only I, who knew his rhythm and habits for years, noticed something slightly off about him. Small things. He arrived later than usual. I found him twice staring blankly in his office when I passed by the door. In a staff meeting, he gave instructions that contradicted something he himself had established the previous week without seeming to notice. They weren't serious things. They weren't things that could be pointed out directly. German was just a little out of focus. One Wednesday of the third week, I found him standing in front of the door to the reserved funds storage. He wasn't doing anything. He was just standing in front of the door, with his hand on the doorknob, but not turning it. I approached. "Do you need something from the storage?" I asked him. He turned to me with an expression that took a second to compose into something normal. "No," he said. "No, I was just passing by." There was no functional reason for German to go through the storage corridor. His office was on the opposite side of the library. "Are you okay?" I asked him. "Perfectly," he said, and left. That afternoon I called Don Severo again. I told him about German. Don Severo listened and then said, "How long was he looking at the book when he saw it open?" "I don't know exactly. When I got to the office, he already had it in front of him. The middle pages or the beginning ones? The middle ones, I think, where the large illustrations were." Silence. "I need you to do something," Don Severo said. "Tell me." "There is a way to neutralize the exposure. It's not complicated, but it requires you to access the book." Pause. "Are you willing to do it?" "It depends on what it involves." "Open the book to the last page. Only the last one. Do not look at the intermediate illustrations while flipping through the pages. Flip them quickly, one by one, until you reach the end, and read aloud what it says on the last page. It doesn't matter if you don't understand Latin. Just pronounce it." "And does that solve the issue with German?" "It should reverse the brief exposure." A pause. "There's something else. After reading the last page, the book must be sealed, not just closed. Sealed with wax over the closure, so it cannot be opened without breaking the seal." What kind of wax? Any beeswax candle, not paraffin. Pure beeswax. I spent the next day looking for a pure beeswax candle, which turned out to be more complicated than expected in a city where most decorative candles are made of paraffin or blends. I found it in a natural products store 6 blocks from the library, a small amber-colored candle with that specific sweet smell of genuine beeswax. That night I returned to the library. I went to the storage, took out the box, removed the polyethylene, and with the book in front of me on the work shelf, with the candle lit beside me and the smell of beeswax mixing with the scent of the storage, I took a deep breath and opened the book. I flipped through the middle pages quickly, looking just enough to find the edge of the next one and not lose track of the progress. What I saw with my peripheral vision in those illustrations I did not stop to examine. I didn't want to. There was something in them, in the way the eye caught them fleetingly, that generated a restlessness I preferred not to feed with direct attention. I reached the last page. It was different from the others. No illustrations, just tightly written text in Latin, with a more careless handwriting than the rest of the book, as if it had been written in a hurry, or with something different from the mood of the rest of the document. I read it aloud. My Latin is basic, that of someone who has catalogued enough texts in that language to recognize structures but not to understand fluently. I pronounced it as best I could, with the open vowels of ecclesiastical Latin, which was what I had heard the most, and at some point in the reading I noticed something I couldn't describe, a change in the quality of the silence of the deposit, as if the air suddenly had a different density, or as if something that had been very close for the past few weeks shifted to a greater distance. I finished the page. I closed the book. I took the beeswax candle and melted wax over the binding closure, covering the line where the upper cover touched the body of the book. The amber wax sealed that line in a way that made it impossible to open without visibly breaking the seal. I put the book back in its box, closed the box, and placed it back on the shelf. I extinguished the candle. I went home. The next morning, German arrived on time for the first time in weeks. In the staff meeting, he was completely present, coherent, his usual rhythm. He didn't mention the book, nor did I say anything to him. I called Don Severo to tell him. He answered more slowly than before with a voice that sounded more tired. "Good," he said when I finished. "Very good. Are you okay?" I asked him. "I am as I am," he said. "Old and tired." Pause. "The book is in good hands, Isabel. I'm glad I took it there." "What do I do if the seal breaks someday?" I asked. "Read the last page again and reseal it," Don Severo said. "Always the last page, always forward, never look back, and always beeswax." "Is there anything else I should know?" A long pause. "That book is not going to leave," he finally said. "It will be in that library as long as the library exists, and every acquisitions manager who comes after you will need to know what you know now." That was 8 months ago. The book is in the reserved fund storage, in its conservation box with the wax seal intact. German is fine. The library is functioning normally. But there are days when I spend time in the storage working on other materials, when I notice the smell. Very faint, almost imperceptible, like a reminder that it is there. The seal remains whole. I check it once a week, with the same systematic approach one uses to check anything that matters. Don Severo died 6 weeks after our last conversation. I saw him in the obituary section of the local newspaper. I did not attend the funeral because I did not know him well enough, but I sat in silence for a moment that day, thinking about an 82-year-old man who had spent decades caring for something he had not asked to take care of, who had sought the safest place he could find to leave it, and who had died without fully knowing if he had made the right decision. I believe he did. But I also think I have many years ahead of me to verify that seal once a week, and that I will need to find, when the time comes, someone I can trust enough to tell this to, just like Don Severo told me. That was what Isabel wanted to share. She told me that writing it down was partly a way to leave it recorded, in case someday someone needs to know. I thought there was something brave in that decision, to tell a story that most people would choose to keep silent. What struck me the most is that chain of people who care for something without having chosen it, who receive a responsibility from someone who can no longer hold it. If this story impacted you, let me know in the comments. And if you have something waiting to be told, don't keep it forever. There's a place for that here. Have a good night. We'll talk in the next one.